Picture this: a quiet new teacher, constantly tormented by ruthless bullies who see her as an easy target. They mock her, humiliate her, and push her to the breaking point until one fateful day when they cross the ultimate line, physically tearing her shirt in front of the entire school. But what these bullies don't know is that beneath her gentle exterior lies a devastating secret that will turn their world upside down in the most spectacular way imaginable. This is the story of how one moment of cruelty unleashed a whirlwind of justice that no one saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog clung to the red brick walls of Riverside Academy, like a gray blanket, masking the quiet desperation that would soon explode into chaos. Nestled in the heart of suburban Michigan, this prestigious private school prided itself on producing tomorrow's leaders, but beneath its polished exterior lurked the same age-old dynamics of power, intimidation, and survival that plagued schools everywhere. Jessica Martinez stepped through the imposing oak doors of Riverside Academy for what would become the most transformative day of her teaching career. At 28, she possessed an almost ethereal quality that made her seem younger than her years. Her long auburn hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her wardrobe consisted entirely of modest cardigans, flowing skirts, and comfortable flats that whispered rather than clicked against the marble floors. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, her green eyes held a gentleness that students either respected or exploited. This was only her third week at Riverside Academy, having transferred from a small rural school in northern Michigan where she'd taught elementary mathematics. For 5 years, the transition hadn't been smooth. The students here were different, more entitled, more aggressive, more willing to test boundaries. They came from families with generational wealth, political connections, and the kind of influence that could make problems disappear with a simple phone call. Jessica had hoped that teaching at a prestigious institution would represent a step forward in her career, but instead, she found herself questioning that decision daily. The hallways of Riverside Academy felt like a battlefield, where she was perpetually outgunned and outmaneuvered. The source of her torment had a name, and that name was Derek Thompson. At 17, Derek stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with the kind of athletic build that came from years of lacrosse training and personal fitness coaches. His blonde hair was always perfectly styled, his uniform always impeccably pressed, and his smile carried the dangerous charm of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Derek was the captain of the lacrosse team, the son of Michigan's lieutenant governor, and the unofficial king of Riverside Academy's complex social hierarchy. But Derek didn't operate alone. His inner circle consisted of 3 equally privileged and equally ruthless accomplices. Marcus Williams, the vice captain of the lacrosse team, was Derek's primary enforcer, a broad-shouldered 17-year-old with dark hair and cold blue eyes who took particular pleasure in psychological intimidation. Then there was Brandon Hayes, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Midwest. Brandon was the group's strategist, always finding creative ways to torment their targets while maintaining plausible deniability. Finally, there was Kyle Morrison, whose father sat on the school's board of directors. Kyle was perhaps the most dangerous of the group because his family's financial contributions to the school made him virtually untouchable. From Jessica's very first day, these 4 had marked her as prey. It started subtly, papers thrown at her back during lessons, deliberately disruptive conversations during her explanations, and the kind of eye-rolling and sighing that was designed to undermine her authority. When she tried to address these behaviors directly, they would feign innocence with the practiced skill of seasoned manipulators. "Sorry, Miss Martinez," Derek would say, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I was just asking Marcus about the assignment. We're really interested in learning." The other teachers had warned her, though not in so many words. During her brief orientation, Mrs. Patricia Fleming, the stern-faced mathematics department head, had pulled Jessica aside for what she called helpful advice. "The students here come from influential families," Mrs. Fleming had said carefully, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun that matched her personality. "They're accustomed to a certain level of flexibility in their academic experience. Sometimes it's better to choose your battles wisely." What Mrs. Fleming was really saying, Jessica realized, was that certain students were essentially untouchable. Their parents' donations, political connections, and social status created a protective bubble around them that even extended to their behavior toward faculty members. Principal Robert Ashford, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit that probably cost more than Jessica's monthly salary, had been even more direct during their one and only meeting. "Miss Martinez," he had said from behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by photographs of himself with various politicians and celebrities, "Riverside Academy has a reputation to maintain. Our students go on to attend Ivy League universities and assume positions of leadership in society. Sometimes that means accommodating different learning styles and personality types." The message was clear: don't make waves, don't cause problems, and definitely don't cross the wrong students. But accommodation and understanding only went so far, and Derek Thompson's crew seemed determined to test every boundary Jessica had. They would arrive late to her classes with elaborate excuses, turn in assignments that were obviously plagiarized, and engage in side conversations that were designed to disrupt her lessons. When she tried to maintain order, they would exchange looks and smirks that suggested they knew something she didn't. The psychological warfare escalated gradually. They began making comments about her appearance, nothing overtly offensive, just subtle digs that chipped away at her confidence. "Miss Martinez, did you get that sweater from a thrift store?" Brandon would ask with fake concern. "My mom has some designer clothes she was going to donate. I could ask her to set some aside for you." "Those glasses are really vintage," Kyle would add. "Very retro. Like really retro." Marcus preferred the direct approach, deliberately bumping into her in the hallways, and then apologizing with exaggerated politeness. "Oh, sorry, Miss Martinez. I didn't see you there. You're so tiny." Jessica tried every strategy she could think of. She spoke with Mrs. Fleming about the behavior, only to be told that boys will be boys, and that she needed to establish better classroom management. She attempted to connect with the students on a personal level, trying to understand their interests and find common ground. She even tried ignoring the behavior entirely, hoping they would grow bored and move on to other targets. Nothing worked. If anything, her attempts to address the situation seemed to embolden them. They began testing her reactions, seeing how far they could push before she snapped. Derek, in particular, seemed to take perverse pleasure in finding new ways to humiliate her. The breaking point had been building for days. Jessica could feel it in the way they looked at her, the way they whispered among themselves when she walked by, the way their smiles had grown sharper and more predatory. Something was coming, and she knew it wouldn't be pleasant. What Jessica didn't know, what no one at Riverside Academy could possibly know, was that beneath her gentle exterior lay a secret that would shatter their understanding of who she really was. For Jessica Martinez hadn't always been a mathematics teacher in suburban Michigan. There was another life, another name, another world that she had deliberately left behind. A world where strength wasn't measured by family connections or trust, funds, but by discipline, technique, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. That world was about to collide with Riverside Academy in a way that would change everything forever. As Jessica walked through the marble corridors that morning, carrying her lesson plans and trying to prepare herself mentally for another day of subtle torture, she had no idea that this would be the day her two worlds finally met. She had no idea that Derek Thompson and his crew had planned something special for her, something that would cross a line she never imagined they would dare to cross. And she had absolutely no idea that when that line was crossed, the quiet mathematics teacher they thought they knew would disappear forever, replaced by someone far more dangerous than they could possibly comprehend. The morning of October 15th began like any other at Riverside Academy, with the usual symphony of expensive car engines purring in the parking lot and the chatter of privileged teenagers discussing their weekend plans. But Derek Thompson had something special planned for Jessica Martinez, something that would escalate their campaign of harassment to a level that would shock even his most hardened accomplices. Derek had spent the previous weekend at his family's lake house in Traverse City, where a conversation with his older brother Cameron had planted a particularly vicious seed. Cameron, a sophomore at Northwestern University, had regaled Derek with stories of how his fraternity brothers had handled professors who didn't show proper respect to their social status. The key, Cameron had explained while they sat on the dock, beers in hand despite Derek's underage status, is to make it look accidental. You can't leave evidence that shows intent, but you can definitely send a message that sticks. Derek had listened intently, his mind already racing with possibilities. Jessica Martinez had been a thorn in his side for weeks now, actually expecting him to complete assignments and participate in class discussions like some common student. She had even had the audacity to give him a C- on his last quiz, despite his subtle hints about his father's position in state government. The plan Derek devised was elegant in simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. It would require precise timing, careful positioning, and the kind of coordinated effort that made his lacrosse team so successful on the field. Most importantly, it would happen in front of the maximum number of witnesses, ensuring that Jessica's humiliation would be complete and lasting. Jessica arrived at school that morning with an unusual sense of optimism. She had spent the previous evening grading papers and had been pleasantly surprised to find that several of her struggling students were beginning to show real improvement. Maybe things were finally turning around. Maybe she was finding her footing. At Riverside Academy, after all, she wore a cream-colored blouse that morning, paired with a navy cardigan and a modest gray skirt. It was one of her favorite outfits, one that made her feel professional and confident. The blouse was made of delicate silk, a small luxury she had allowed herself when she got the job at Riverside Academy. It made her feel like she belonged in this world of wealth and privilege, even if she would never truly be part of it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her first 3 classes passed without incident. Derek wasn't in any of those sections, and the other students seemed genuinely engaged with the material. For a brief moment, Jessica allowed herself to believe that maybe her troubles were behind her. Maybe Derek and his crew had grown bored with tormenting her and moved on to other targets. That illusion shattered the moment she entered her 4th period advanced algebra class. Derek was already there, seated in his usual spot in the back corner, but something was different about his demeanor. Instead of his typical slouched posture and bored expression, he sat upright with an alertness that reminded Jessica of a predator preparing to strike. Marcus, Brandon, and Kyle were positioned strategically around the room, their placement seeming random to casual observation, but actually forming a carefully planned formation. The other students filed in with their usual mix of enthusiasm and resignation. Among them was Ashley Chun, a quiet junior who had always been kind to Jessica, and Michael Rodriguez, a sophomore who struggled with mathematics but never gave up trying. These students had become Jessica's anchors in the storm of Riverside Academy politics, reminding her why she had chosen teaching in the first place. As the bell rang and Jessica moved to close the classroom door, she noticed something that made her pause. The hallway outside was unusually crowded for this time of day, with students lingering near her door as if waiting for something to happen. Their phones were already out, and several were positioned at angles that would provide clear views into her classroom. A chill ran down Jessica's spine as she realized that whatever Derek had planned, it was going to be public. She closed the door and moved to the front of the classroom, her hands trembling slightly as she organized her materials. On the podium, the lesson plan for today covered quadratic equations, a topic that required careful explanation and plenty of examples. Under normal circumstances, it would be challenging but manageable. Today, however, Jessica could feel the weight of anticipation in the air. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady despite her growing anxiety. "Today we're going to explore quadratic equations and learn how to solve them using the quadratic formula." She turned to write on the whiteboard, and that's when Derek made his first move. "Miss Martinez," he called out, his voice carrying a tone of false respect that immediately put her on guard. "I was wondering if you could help me understand something about yesterday's homework." Jessica turned back to face the class, noting that Derek was holding up his worksheet with an expression of exaggerated confusion. She had learned to be wary of Derek's questions, as they were usually designed to waste time or create opportunities for disruption. "What specifically are you having trouble with, Derek?" she asked, maintaining her professional demeanor. Derek stood up from his desk, his 6'2" frame towering over the other seated students. "Well, I was looking at problem number 7, and I just can't figure out where I went wrong." He began walking toward the front of the classroom, his movement casual but purposeful. Jessica noticed that Marcus had also stood up, ostensibly to sharpen his pencil at the sharpener mounted on the wall near the door. Brandon was rummaging through his backpack with unnecessary enthusiasm, while Kyle had his phone out, claiming to use the calculator app. Every instinct Jessica had developed over her years of teaching was screaming that something was wrong, but she couldn't identify the specific threat. Derek's approach seemed legitimate enough, and she had always encouraged students to seek help when they were struggling. As Derek reached the front of the classroom, Jessica moved to look at his worksheet. That's when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The paper Derek was holding wasn't yesterday's homework assignment at all. It was a blank sheet with random numbers scribbled on it. "Derek, this isn't," she began, but before she could finish the sentence, Derek executed his plan with military precision. He stumbled forward, pretending to trip over nothing, and reached out as if to steady himself. His large hands grabbed Jessica's shoulders, but instead of finding purchase there, his fingers caught the delicate fabric of her silk blouse. The sound of tearing fabric filled the classroom as Derek's accidental grab ripped the front of Jessica's blouse from collar to hem, exposing her plain white camisole underneath. The classroom erupted in gasps and shocked laughter. Jessica's hands flew to her chest, trying to hold the torn fabric together, her face burning with humiliation and rage. Derek stepped back with an expression of mock horror, his hands raised as if to show his innocence. "Oh my God, Miss Martinez, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, his voice carrying just the right note of genuine distress to fool anyone who wasn't looking carefully. "I tripped and tried to catch myself. I didn't mean to," but Jessica wasn't fooled. She could see the satisfaction in Derek's eyes and could hear the barely suppressed laughter in his voice. This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated assault designed to destroy her dignity and her authority in the most public way possible. The classroom door opened, and students from the hallway began peering in, their phones raised to capture every moment of Jessica's humiliation. Word was already spreading through the school's social media networks, and Jessica knew that within minutes, images and videos of this moment would be circulating among hundreds of students. Through the fog of her rage and embarrassment, Jessica became aware of something else, a familiar sensation she hadn't felt in years. Her muscles were tensing in patterns she had trained them to follow thousands of times. Her breathing was shifting to the controlled rhythm she had learned to use in high-stress situations. Her stance was unconsciously adjusting to a position that would provide maximum balance and mobility for the first time since arriving at Riverside Academy. Jessica Martinez was no longer thinking like a mathematics teacher trying to maintain order in her classroom. She was thinking like someone with a very different set of skills, someone who had learned long ago that there were moments when words and professional courtesy were no longer sufficient. Derek, still basking in his apparent victory, made the fatal mistake of reaching toward her again, ostensibly to offer assistance. "Here, let me help you." That's when Jessica's carefully constructed facade finally cracked, and Derek Thompson discovered that he had just made the worst mistake of his privileged life. Time seemed to slow as Derek Thompson reached toward Jessica Martinez for the second time, his hand extended in a gesture that was meant to appear helpful, but carried an unmistakable air of dominance. The torn silk of her blouse hung in tatters, and the classroom full of teenagers held their collective breath, phones raised like weapons in an invisible war. But Derek had miscalculated catastrophically. He had assumed that Jessica Martinez was just another timid teacher who would crumble under public humiliation, accept his hollow apology, and retreat to lick her wounds in private. He had no way of knowing that the woman standing before him had once been known by a completely different name in a completely different world. In the mountains of Colorado, where the air was thin and the training was brutal, she had been called Elena Vasquez. At the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, she had been a phenomenon that coaches whispered about in reverent tones. By age 19, she had been ranked third in the world in her weight class, with a fighting style so fluid and devastating that opponents often found themselves on the mat before they fully understood what had happened to them. But that life had ended in scandal and heartbreak when her coach, Roberto Vasquez, her own father, had been accused of accepting bribes to influence international competition outcomes. The investigation had destroyed not just his career, but Elena's as well, casting doubt on every victory she had ever earned. Rather than fight the accusations and endure years of legal battles and media scrutiny, she had made the painful decision to disappear entirely. Elena Vasquez had died at age 21. Jessica Martinez had been born in her place, complete with forged documents, a fabricated educational background, and a carefully constructed new identity. For 7 years, she had lived quietly as a mathematics teacher, burying her warrior past so deep that sometimes even she forgot who she had been. Until this moment. As Derek's hand moved toward her shoulder, something primal awakened in Jessica's muscle memory. Her body responded to the threat with the lightning-fast reflexes that had once made her untouchable on the Fango international competition circuit. In a movement so quick that most of the watching students couldn't even process what they were seeing, Jessica stepped into Derek's reach, grabbed his extended wrist with her left hand, and pivoted her entire body. The technique was called Seoi Nage, a shoulder throw that used an opponent's forward momentum against them. Derek's 220-pound frame, which had seemed so intimidating moments before, became a liability as Jessica dropped low and rotated her hips. His feet left the ground as she guided his body in a perfect arc over her shoulder. The sound of Derek Thompson hitting the floor was like thunder in the enclosed classroom. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a sharp gasp, and he lay there for a moment, stunned and struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The laughter and chatter that had filled the room moments before died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete that Jessica could hear her own heartbeat. But she wasn't finished. Marcus Williams, Derek's primary enforcer, had been moving toward the front of the classroom during the commotion, ostensibly to offer assistance, but actually to intimidate Jessica further. He was bigger than Derek, 6'4", and built like the linebacker he had been before focusing on lacrosse. His approach had been calculated to make Jessica feel small and helpless. Instead, he found himself facing someone whose green eyes now blazed with a fire he had never seen before. Marcus hesitated, some instinct warning him that the dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically, but his pride and loyalty to Derek overrode his caution. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus snarled, reaching out to grab Jessica's arm. It was exactly the wrong move at exactly the wrong time. Jessica moved like water, flowing around Marcus's grab and positioning herself at his side. Her hands found the grip points on his uniform jacket with the precision of a surgeon, and before Marcus could react, she had executed a perfectly timed uchimata, an inner thigh throw that sent his massive frame crashing into the desks behind him. The metal and plastic, furniture scattered like bowling pins as Marcus's body careened through them. His shocked expression frozen in time as he realized that the quiet math teacher had just manhandled him like he was a child. Brandon Hayes and Kyle Morrison, the other two members of Derek's crew, stood frozen near the back of the classroom. Brandon's mouth hung open in disbelief, while Kyle had actually taken a step backward, his phone forgotten in his hand as he processed the impossible scene unfolding before him. Derek was struggling to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his uniform wrinkled and dirty from his impact with the floor. But more than his physical appearance, it was his aura of invincibility that had been shattered. For the first time in his privileged life, Derek Thompson had encountered someone who wouldn't be intimidated by his size, his connections, or his threats. "You crazy witch!" he shouted, his voice cracking with adolescent fury. "My father is going to have you arrested. You can't assault students." Jessica stood in the center of the classroom, her torn blouse still clutched together with one hand, but her posture radiating a confidence that seemed to transform her entirely. The frightened teacher who had entered the room that morning was gone, replaced by someone who moved with the controlled grace of a predator. "I defended myself," she said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority that cut through Derek's bluster. "You physically assaulted me, and I responded appropriately." "That's not what happened," Derek protested, looking around the room for support. "Everyone saw me on the trip. It was an accident." But as his eyes swept the classroom, Derek realized that his carefully orchestrated plan had backfired spectacularly. The students who had been filming the encounter had captured everything: his deliberate approach, the obviously intentional grab, and Jessica's devastating response. Even worse, several students were now looking at him with expressions ranging from disgust to open admiration for Jessica. Ashley Chen, the quiet junior who rarely spoke in class, stood up from her desk with her phone in her hand. "I recorded the whole thing," she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Derek grabbed her on purpose. "This wasn't an accident." Michael Rodriguez nodded emphatically from his seat. "She was just defending herself." Derek started it. Other students began murmuring their agreement, and Derek realized with growing horror that his plan to humiliate Jessica had instead turned the entire class against him. The social dynamics that had always worked in his favor were crumbling before his eyes. Marcus had finally extracted himself from the wreckage of desks and chairs, his uniform torn and his pride in tatters. A thin line of blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where he had struck the corner of a desk during his fall. He looked like he wanted to charge at Jessica again, but something in her stance warned him that a second attempt would end even worse than the first. Brandon and Kyle remained frozen near the back of the room, their usual bravado completely evaporated. They had signed up to be part of Derek's crew because it offered them protection and social status, not because they were prepared to face actual physical confrontation with someone who clearly possessed skills they couldn't begin to understand. Classroom door burst open as Mrs. Fleming rushed in, drawn by the commotion and the crowd of students that had gathered in the hallway. Her stern face took in the scene. Derek on the floor looking disheveled, Marcus bleeding and surrounded by overturned furniture, and Jessica standing in the center of it all with her blouse torn, but her bearing regal. "What in God's name is Happening here? Mrs. Fleming demanded, her voice sharp with authority. Before Derek could speak, Ashley Chun held up her phone. Mrs. Fleming, Derek attacked Missy Martinez and ripped her shirt. She was just defending herself. I have it all on video. Mrs. Fleming's eyes narrowed as she looked from Derek to Jessica, clearly trying to process how a situation involving 4 athletic teenage boys had resulted in them being the ones who appeared to have come out worse. Derek scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. She attacked us. She's some kind of psycho. My father is going to sue this school into the ground. But even as he made his threats, Derek's voice lacked the confidence it had carried just minutes before. For the first time in his life, he had encountered someone who couldn't be intimidated by his family's wealth and influence. Someone who had responded to his aggression with a level of skill that made his own physical advantages irrelevant. Jessica looked around the classroom at the faces staring back at her, some shocked, some admiring, some fearful. She knew that this moment would change everything, that her carefully constructed new life was about to face scrutiny she had hoped to avoid forever. But as she felt the familiar calm that came after successful combat, she realized something surprising. She wasn't afraid anymore. The silence that followed Mrs. Fleming's arrival stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. The mathematics department head stood in the doorway, her gray eyes scanning the chaos with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to managing crises. But nothing in her 30-year career at Riverside Academy had prepared her for the scene before her. Derek Thompson, the untouchable son of Michigan's lieutenant governor, sat on the floor with his designer uniform wrinkled and his perfect hair disheveled. Marcus Williams, the team's star defender, was dabbing at a cut on his forehead with his sleeve, looking like he'd been hit by a freight train. Overturned desks and scattered papers created a battlefield landscape in what had been an orderly classroom just minutes before. And in the center of it all stood Jessica Martinez, her silk blouse torn but her green eyes blazing with an intensity that transformed her completely. The timid new teacher Mrs. Fleming had hired 3 weeks ago had vanished, replaced by someone who radiated controlled power. Mrs. Fleming, Ashley Chun spoke up again, her voice cutting through the tension. You need to see this video before anyone says anything else. The department head extended her hand for Ashley's phone, but Derek scrambled to his feet with desperate urgency. Don't listen to her. She's lying. That psycho teacher attacked us for no reason. Mrs. Fleming's expression darkened. In all her years at Riverside Academy, she had never heard a student refer to a faculty member as a psycho. The Thompson family's influence was considerable, but Patricia Fleming had been protecting teachers long before Derek was born. Mr. Thompson, she said coldly, you will lower your voice and watch your language, or you will find yourself in Principal Ashford's office explaining your behavior to your father personally. Derek's face went pale. The last thing he wanted was his father learning about this incident, especially if the truth about his behavior came to light. Governor Thompson had been very clear about the importance of maintaining the family's reputation, particularly with his re-election campaign approaching. Mrs. Fleming took Ashley's phone and pressed play. The classroom fell silent as the footage began, showing Derek's calculated approach toward Jessica, his deliberate grab, and the devastating throws that followed. The audio captured everything: Derek's fake concern, the ripping of fabric, and Jessica's calm but firm declaration that she was defending herself. As the video ended, Mrs. Fleming's expression had transformed from concern to barely controlled fury. She handed the phone back to Ashley and turned to face Derek with the kind of look that had intimidated generations of students. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice arctic, in 30 years of teaching, I have never witnessed such a blatant assault on a faculty member. You deliberately destroyed Miss Martinez's clothing in front of the entire class, clearly intending to humiliate her. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But I tripped. It was an accident. The video shows otherwise. Mrs. Fleming replied curtly. Your approach was deliberate, your grab was intentional, and your subsequent behavior has been disgraceful. She turned to Marcus, who was still nursing his wounded pride and bleeding forehead. Mr. Williams, your decision to physically threaten Miss Martinez, after she had already been assaulted, shows a complete lack of judgment and basic human decency. Marcus tried to find his voice. She threw us around like we were nothing. She could have killed us. She defended herself against two attackers who were each significantly larger than her, Mrs. Fleming shot back. The fact that she was able to do so effectively speaks to her training, not to any excessive force on her part. By now, word of the incident had spread throughout the school like wildfire. Principal Ashford appeared in the doorway, his expensive suit and silver hair making him look every inch the politician he had been before entering education. Behind him came Coach Stevens, the lacrosse team's head coach, whose face was already red with concern for his star players. What exactly is happening here? Principal Ashford demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his questions answered immediately. Mrs. Fleming gestured toward Ashley's phone. Principal Ashford, I believe you need to see this footage before we proceed any further. As the video played again, Jessica watched Principal Ashford's face carefully. She had learned to read administrators during her years in education, and she could see the exact moment when his concern shifted from the welfare of his students to the potential liability facing his school. Derek Thompson might be the son of the lieutenant governor, but a video of him assaulting a female teacher would be a public relations nightmare that could destroy careers. Coach Stevens, however, seemed more concerned with his players' physical condition than the legal implications. Marcus, are you seriously injured? Derek, what's your status? Coach, she attacked us, Derek protested, his voice rising again. She's some kind of trained killer or something. Jessica finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. I have a black belt in Judo, which I earned through years of legitimate training. When Mr. Thompson physically assaulted me and Mr. Williams attempted to do the same, I used minimal necessary force to defend myself. Principal Ashford's eyebrows rose. This was information that hadn't been in Jessica's employment file, which meant she had deliberately omitted it during the hiring process. Miss Martinez, why wasn't this training disclosed during your application process? Jessica met his gaze steadily, because it was irrelevant to my qualifications as a mathematics teacher. I never intended to use those skills in a classroom setting. But you did use them, Coach Stevens pointed out, clearly troubled by the idea that his star athletes had been bested by a teacher half their size. Only after being physically attacked, Jessica replied firmly. I have a right to defend myself, regardless of my profession. Derek, sensing that the adults were taking Jessica's side, played his final card. My father is going to hear about this. You can't just assault students and get away with it. Principal Ashford's face hardened. The threat was crude and obvious, but it carried real weight. Governor Thompson's influence extended throughout Michigan's educational system, and a single phone call could make life very difficult for everyone involved. But Mrs. Fleming had reached her limit. Mr. Thompson, are you threatening the administration of this school? I'm just saying that my father won't tolerate his son being attacked by some psycho teacher. The word psycho hung in the air like a slap. Mrs. Fleming's face went white with rage, and even Principal Ashford looked shocked by Derek's choice of language. That's enough, Principal Ashford said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Williams, you will report to my office immediately. Coach Stevens, please accompany them. Derek looked around the room desperately, realizing that his usual tactics weren't working. The video evidence was too clear, his behavior too obvious, and his language too offensive to ignore. This isn't over, he muttered as he headed toward the door. Jessica stepped forward, and Derek instinctively flinched. remembering how easily she had thrown him to the ground. But her voice remained calm and professional. "Yes, Mr. Thompson, it is over. Your behavior toward me and toward other students ends today." As the group filed out of the classroom, Mrs. Fleming turned to Jessica with an expression that mixed concern with newfound respect. "Miss Martinez, I think we need to have a conversation about your background. There are clearly things about your qualifications that we weren't aware of." Jessica nodded, knowing that her carefully constructed new life was about to face scrutiny she had hoped to avoid. But as she looked around the classroom at the faces of her students, Ashley Chun's admiring smile, Michael Rodriguez's thumbs up, and the general atmosphere of respect rather than fear, she realized something important. For the first time since arriving at Riverside Academy, she felt like she belonged. The conference room at Riverside Academy had witnessed many difficult conversations over the years, but none quite like the one that was about to unfold. Jessica Martinez sat across from a panel that included Principal Ashford, Mrs. Fleming, Superintendent Dr. Catherine Morrison, and surprisingly, the school's legal counsel, Attorney James Wellington. The presence of a lawyer told Jessica everything she needed to know about how seriously the administration was taking this incident. Dr. Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on handling crisis situations, opened a thick manila folder that Jessica assumed contained her employment records. But as the superintendent began pulling out documents that Jessica had never seen before, her blood ran cold. "Miss Martinez," Dr. Morrison began, her voice carefully neutral, or should I say Miss Elena Vasquez. The name hit Jessica like a physical blow. After 7 years of carefully constructed anonymity, her past had finally caught up with her. She maintained her composure, but inside her mind was racing through the implications of this revelation. "I legally changed my name 7 years ago," Jessica replied evenly. "Jessica Martinez is my legal identity." Attorney Wellington leaned forward, his expensive suit and calculating eyes giving him the appearance of a predator sizing up prey. "The question, Miss Martinez, is why you felt the need to completely reconstruct your identity when applying for a position at our institution." Jessica had known this moment would come eventually. She had prepared for it, rehearsed her explanations, but she had hoped to have more time to establish herself before facing this scrutiny. Now with Derek Thompson's father undoubtedly applying pressure from above, she found herself in the worst possible position. "I changed my identity to escape a situation that had become untenable," Jessica said carefully. "My father was involved in a scandal that destroyed both our reputations. I wanted a fresh start." Dr. Morrison consulted her notes. "Your father, Roberto Vasquez, was accused of accepting bribes to influence Olympic qualifying matches. The investigation implicated several athletes, including you." "I was never formally charged with anything," Jessica replied firmly. "The investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing on my part. But the cloud of suspicion was enough to end your competitive career," Mrs. Fleming observed, her tone more sympathetic than accusatory. Jessica nodded. "The sport I loved had become poisoned for me. Every victory was questioned, every technique analyzed for signs of corruption. I couldn't continue living under that shadow." Principal Ashford, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Miss Martinez, I can understand wanting to escape a difficult situation. What I can't understand is why you concealed skills that could have been valuable to our school. We have ongoing issues with student discipline and violence. A teacher with your training could have been an asset. Because I didn't want to be seen as a weapon," Jessica replied passionately. "I wanted to be a teacher, not a security guard. I wanted students to respect me for my knowledge and teaching ability, not fear me because of my physical skills." Attorney Wellington shuffled through more papers. "According to these records, you were ranked 3rd in the world in your weight class at age 19. You won 6 national championships and competed in 2 world championships. These aren't the credentials of someone who just dabbled in martial arts. Jessica felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with discussing her former life. That person doesn't exist anymore. Elena Vasquez died when the scandal broke. I rebuilt myself as Jessica Martinez because I wanted to contribute to society in a different way. But she came back pretty dramatically this morning, Dr. Morrison observed. Derek Thompson outweighs you by at least 80 pounds, and you threw him like he was a child. That kind of muscle memory doesn't just disappear. Mrs. Fleming leaned forward. Jessica, what exactly happened during your father's investigation? We need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Jessica took a deep breath, knowing that the whole truth was her only path forward. My father was approached by a man named Viktor Petrov, who claimed to represent international sports betting syndicates. Petrov offered my father substantial money to ensure that certain outcomes occurred in qualifying matches for the Olympics. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Olympic corruption was a federal crime that could have destroyed dozens of careers and potentially sent people to prison for decades. My father refused, Jessica continued. But Petrov didn't take no for an answer. He began making threats against me, suggesting that my safety depended on my father's cooperation. When my father still refused, Petrov manufactured evidence that made it appear as though the bribes had been accepted. Attorney Wellington's eyebrows rose. Manufactured evidence? Bank records showing deposits that never actually occurred, recorded phone conversations that had been doctored, testimony from other athletes who had been coerced into lying, Jessica explained. By the time we realized what was happening, the story had already broken in the international media. Principal Ashford looked troubled. Why didn't you fight these accusations if the evidence was fabricated? Because Petrov made it clear that fighting would result in more than just damaged reputations, Jessica said quietly. My father received photos of me taken outside our apartment, at the training center, at school. The message was clear: cooperate or face consequences. Dr. Morrison consulted another document. According to this FBI report, Roberto Vasquez disappeared 2 weeks before he was scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury. He's been missing for 7 years. Jessica's composure finally cracked slightly. I don't know what happened to him. One day he was there, the next day he was gone. He left me a note saying that he was going to make sure I could have a normal life, and that I should disappear and start over. The room fell silent as the magnitude of Jessica's situation became clear. She hadn't just changed her name to escape embarrassment. She had reconstructed her entire identity to escape what appeared to be organized crime. Mrs. Fleming reached across the table and touched Jessica's hand gently. My dear, why didn't you tell us any of this during the hiring process? We could have provided additional security, taken precautions, because I thought it was over, Jessica replied. 7 years have passed. I thought I was safe. I thought Jessica Martinez could live quietly and contribute to society without anyone ever knowing that Elena Vasquez had existed. Attorney Wellington was taking extensive notes. Miss Martinez, do you have any reason to believe that Viktor Petrov or his associates have discovered your new identity? Jessica shook her head. I've been extremely careful. I've had no contact with anyone from my former life. I chose Michigan specifically because it was far from anywhere I had completed or trained. Dr. Morrison closed the file in front of her. This puts us in a very difficult position, Jessica. Derek Thompson's father is demanding your termination, and he has significant political influence. But now we're learning that you may be under federal witness protection, which complicates things considerably. I'm not under official federal protection, Jessica clarified. I disappeared on my own, created my own new identity. The FBI never offered me protection because I wasn't considered a key witness. Principal Ashford rubbed his temples. This morning we had a simple disciplinary matter involving a student assaulting a teacher. Now we're dealing with international organized crime, missing persons, and federal investigations. And meanwhile, Mrs. Fleming added, we have a student who physically assaulted a faculty member and is using his father's political position to avoid consequences. Attorney Wellington looked up from his notes. Actually, that may be the least of our problems now. If Jessica's true identity becomes public, it could attract exactly the kind of attention she's been trying to avoid for 7 years. The implications hit Jessica like a sledgehammer. Derek's video was already circulating on social media. If someone with the right knowledge saw her fighting techniques, if someone recognized her movement patterns from her competitive days, her carefully constructed anonymity could be shattered in hours. We need to contain this situation immediately, Dr. Morrison declared. Jessica, you're going on administrative leave while we figure out how to proceed. We'll cite the need for a full investigation of this morning's incident. What about Derek and his crew? Mrs. Fleming asked pointedly. Principal Ashford's expression hardened. Despite his father's influence, Derek Thompson physically assaulted a faculty member in front of witnesses. He'll face appropriate consequences. As the meeting concluded, Jessica felt a mixture of relief and terror. Her secret was out, but at least she was among people who seemed committed to protecting her. The question now was whether 7 years of careful hiding would be enough to keep her safe, or whether one moment of self-defense had just put her life in danger once again. Within 3 hours of Derek Thompson hitting the floor in Jessica Martinez's classroom, the video had exploded across every social media platform imaginable. What started as Ashley Chun's recorded evidence had morphed into a viral phenomenon that no one could have predicted. The hashtag Judo teacher was trending nationally, with the original clip being shared, remixed, and analyzed by millions of viewers. But for Jessica, sitting in her modest apartment 12 miles from Riverside Academy, the viral fame felt more like a death sentence than a victory. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, friend requests, and messages from reporters, documentary filmmakers, and talk show producers. The doorbell had rung 17 times since she'd arrived home, forcing her to keep all the curtains drawn and ignore the persistent knocking. Through her peephole, she could see news vans lining the street outside her apartment complex. The video itself had spawned countless variations. Sports commentators were breaking down her techniques frame by frame. Self-defense instructors were using it as a teaching tool. Martial arts forums were debating whether her throws were competition level or purely practical. Most disturbingly, several posts were beginning to connect her fighting style to archival footage of a young judo champion named Elena Vasquez. Jessica's laptop screen displayed a particularly concerning Reddit thread titled, "Teacher's Judo Skills Look Familiar." User after user was posting side-by-side comparisons of her throws with Elena Vasquez's signature techniques from international competitions 7 years earlier. The resemblance was becoming impossible to ignore. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. Through the comments, same hip positioning, same grip sequence. Has to be the same person. Elena Vasquez disappeared after that corruption scandal. What if she just changed her name? Someone needs to do a facial recognition comparison. If this is Elena Vasquez, she's supposed to be hiding from some seriously dangerous people. That last comment made Jessica's blood run cold. Somewhere in the comments section of viral videos, someone might be learning exactly where Elena Vasquez had been hiding for 7 years. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered, "Miss Martinez? This is Agent Sarah Chun with the FBI." The voice was professional but urgent. "We need to talk immediately. Your safety may be compromised." Jessica's worst fears were crystallizing. "How did you find me?" "The same way anyone else with the right resources could find you," Agent Chun replied grimly. "Your video has been viewed over 2 million times in the past 3 hours. Facial Recognition software has already identified you as Elena Vasquez in at least 4 different online forums. Where are you? Jessica asked, already moving toward her bedroom closet where she kept a go bag she'd hoped never to use. We're in the parking lot outside your building. There's a black SUV with government plates. Can you see us? Jessica peered through her blinds and spotted the vehicle immediately. 2 figures in dark suits stood beside it, scanning the area with the practiced alertness of federal agents. But what terrified her more was the white van parked across the street with a parabolic antenna on its roof. Agent Chun, there's a surveillance van across the street. I don't think it's the media. The pause on the other end of the line told Jessica everything she needed to know. Miss Martinez, we need you to pack only essential items and come with us immediately. Do not use the front entrance. Is there a back exit? Jessica was already stuffing clothes into her bag. 7 years of careful planning had prepared her for this moment, but she had hoped it would never come. Yes, there's a service entrance through the basement, but what about my job? My students? Your students will be fine, Agent Chun said firmly. You won't be if we don't move now. The van across the street belongs to a private intelligence firm that has connections to some very dangerous people. As Jessica made her way through her apartment, grabbing documents and essential items, her mind raced with questions about how everything had unraveled so quickly. Derek Thompson's cruel prank had set off a chain reaction that was now threatening to destroy the safe life she had built. Her laptop chimed with a new email notification. The sender's address made her freeze. VPETROV225@encrypted.mail. The message was brief but chilling. Elena, impressive performance today. We've missed watching you work. Time to finish our conversation. From 7 years ago. You have 48 hours to contact us, or we'll contact you in ways you won't enjoy. Your students at Riverside Academy are lovely, by the way. Especially that brave little Ashley Chun. Jessica's hands shook as she realized that not only had Victor Petrov found her, but he was now threatening her students. The life she had built as Jessica Martinez had been meant to protect innocent people from the dangerous world she had escaped. Now that world was reaching out to touch everyone she cared about. She grabbed her phone and called Agent Chun back. They've contacted me. Petrov, he's threatening my students. We're coming up, Agent Chun replied. Pack faster. Meanwhile, back at Riverside Academy, the administrative crisis was reaching a boiling point. Governor Thompson had arrived at the school personally, accompanied by his own security detail and a team of lawyers. His presence in Principal Ashford's office created a tension that could be felt throughout the building. Derek sat beside his father, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. The viral video had turned him from a local bully into a national laughingstock. Comments on social media ranged from mockery to outright calls for criminal charges. His college recruitment prospects were already suffering as coaches distanced themselves from the controversy. Principal Ashford, Governor Thompson began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. My son made a mistake, but this teacher's response was completely disproportionate. No student should fear physical violence from faculty members. Mrs. Fleming, who had remained in the meeting despite Governor Thompson's request that she leave, couldn't contain herself any longer. Governor, your son physically assaulted a female teacher, tearing her clothing in front of 30 witnesses. The fact that she was trained to defend herself doesn't change the nature of his attack. My son tripped, Governor Thompson replied coldly. The contact was accidental. The video evidence suggests otherwise, Principal Ashford said carefully. Walking a tightrope between truth and political pressure, Dr. Morrison entered the office with a grim expression, carrying a tablet displaying news coverage of the incident. I'm afraid we have a bigger problem than disciplinary action. The teacher in question appears to have a complicated background that's now attracting federal attention. Governor Thompson's eyebrows rose. Federal attention? Jessica Martinez appears to be living under an assumed identity. Her real name is Elena Vasquez, and she's connected to an international corruption investigation involving organized crime. Derek looked confused, but Governor Thompson's expression shifted from anger to calculation. A teacher with federal complications was a political opportunity rather than a threat. If this woman has been lying about her identity, then everything about her employment here is fraudulent, he declared. My son is the victim of an assault by someone who obtained her position under false pretenses. But Mrs. Fleming isn't backing down. Governor, regardless of her background, your son committed assault. The video evidence is clear and multiple. Witnesses have confirmed the intentional nature of his actions. At that moment, Principal Ashford's secretary knocked on the door urgently. Sir, there are FBI agents here to speak with you about Miss Martinez. They say it's extremely urgent. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What had started as a school disciplinary matter was now involving federal law enforcement, international crime, and threats that extended far beyond the walls of Riverside Academy. Governor Thompson stood abruptly. This conversation isn't over. If that woman has put my son and other students at risk by bringing her criminal associations to this school, there will be consequences. As he left with Derek in tow, Mrs. Fleming turned to Principal Ashford with a worried expression. Robert, what have we gotten ourselves into? Outside, in an FBI safe house 30 miles away, Jessica Martinez was about to learn that her quiet life as a mathematics teacher was over, and that Elena Vasquez would have to emerge from hiding to protect the students she had grown to love. 3 weeks later, Jessica Martinez stood at the front of a packed federal courtroom in Detroit, no longer hiding behind wire-rimmed glasses or modest cardigans. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a confident ponytail, and she wore a sharp business suit that reflected the strength she had finally stopped concealing. After 7 years of living in the shadows, Elena Vasquez had emerged to face her past and protect her future. The courtroom was divided into distinct camps. On one side sat Victor Petrov and 3 associates, their expensive suits unable to disguise the menace that radiated from their presence. Petrov himself was a lean man in his 50s with silver hair and cold gray eyes that had haunted Jessica's nightmares for years. Beside him sat his lawyers, a team of high-powered attorneys who specialized in defending international crime figures. On the other side, Agent Sarah Chun sat with the federal prosecution team, surrounded by boxes of evidence. That represented 7 years of patient investigation. The FBI had been tracking Petrov's organization since Roberto Vasquez's disappearance, building a case that would finally bring justice to the corruption that had destroyed so many lives. But the most surprising presence in the courtroom was the group of students from Riverside Academy who had come to support their teacher. Ashley Chun sat in the front row, her phone conspicuously absent as she focused entirely on the proceedings. Michael Rodriguez was there, along with a dozen other students who had been inspired by Jessica's courage to stand up for what was right. Even more shocking was the presence of Derek Thompson, who sat with his mother rather than his father. The events of the past 3 weeks had changed him in ways that no one could have predicted. Judge Catherine Walsh called the court to order, her stern demeanor making it clear that she would tolerate no disruptions. We are here today for the sentencing hearing of Victor Petrov and his associates, who have pleaded guilty to charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and witness intimidation in connection with Olympic corruption investigations. Jessica had spent the previous 3 weeks working with federal prosecutors, finally telling the complete truth about her father's disappearance and the threats that had forced her into hiding. The testimony had been painful but cathartic, allowing her to process years of suppressed trauma, while helping to build an airtight case against the organization that had destroyed her family. The breakthrough had come when federal investigators discovered that Petrov's surveillance of Jessica hadn't begun when her video went viral. He had been watching her for months, waiting for the right moment to make contact. His threat against her students had been the mistake that finally gave. The FBI grounds to arrest him and his entire network. Prosecutor David Kim stood to address the court. Your Honor, the defendant Viktor Petrov orchestrated a campaign of intimidation and violence that spanned multiple continents and destroyed numerous careers. His organization corrupted international athletic competitions, threatened witnesses, and caused the disappearance of Roberto Vasquez, whose fate remains unknown to this day. Petrov's defense attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Margaret Foster, attempted to minimize her client's crimes. Your Honor, my client is a businessman who made mistakes in judgment. The government's case relies heavily on the testimony of a woman who has admitted to living under false identity for 7 years. But Judge Walsh wasn't impressed by the defense strategy. Miss Foster, your client's organization threatened to harm innocent students at a high school. Whatever mistakes Ms. Vasquez may have made in protecting herself pale in comparison to your client's actions. When it came time for victim impact statements, Jessica stood and walked to the podium with the same controlled grace she had displayed when facing Derek Thompson's assault. Her voice was clear and strong as she addressed the court. Your Honor, Viktor Petrov didn't just steal my father from me. He stole my identity, my career, and 7 years of my life. He forced me to live in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, never able to form deep relationships, because I could never be completely honest about who I was. She paused, looking directly at Petrov, who met her gaze with the same cold expression he had worn 7 years earlier. But most importantly, he threatened innocent children to get to me. Ashley Chun, Michael Rodriguez, and all my students at Riverside Academy became targets simply because they had the misfortune of being in my classroom when his world collided with mine. Jessica's voice grew stronger as she continued. I won't let fear control my life anymore. I won't let him turn me back into a victim. I am Elena Vasquez, former world-ranked judoka, and I am Jessica Martinez, mathematics teacher. Both identities are part of who I am, and I refuse to hide either one anymore. The courtroom erupted in applause from the Riverside Academy students, causing Judge Walsh to rap her gavel for order. But even the judge seemed moved by Jessica's statement. When it came time for sentencing, Judge Walsh was uncompromising. Mr. Petrov, you will serve 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Your associates will serve terms ranging from 15 to 20 years. This court finds your crimes particularly heinous because they targeted not just your intended victims, but innocent students who had no connection to your criminal enterprise. As the marshals led Petrov away in handcuffs, he turned to look at Jessica one final time. But instead of the frightened young woman he had terrorized 7 years earlier, he saw someone who had found her strength and refused to be intimidated. After the hearing, Jessica found herself surrounded by her students. Outside the courthouse, Ashley Chun was the first to approach, her eyes bright with admiration. Miss Martinez, or should we call you Miss Vasquez now? Ashley asked with a shy smile. Jessica laughed, the sound carrying a lightness that had been absent from her voice. For years, you can call me whatever feels right. I'm still your math teacher, regardless of my name. Michael Rodriguez stepped forward with a question that had been bothering him for weeks. Miss Martinez, are you going to come back to Riverside Academy? Jessica looked at the group of young faces surrounding her, remembering why she had chosen teaching in the first place. If they'll have me, and if you want me back, then yes. But things are going to be different now. Different how? Ashley asked. Well, for one thing, I'm starting a judo club at school. Dr. Morrison thinks it would be good for students to have a healthy outlet for stress and a way to build confidence. The students cheered, and Jessica felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced since her competitive days. She was no longer running from her past or hiding her abilities. She was finally whole. Derek Thompson appeared at the edge of the group, looking uncertain and nervous. The past 3 weeks had been a nightmare for him, as the viral video had destroyed his social status and college prospects. But they had also given him time to reflect on his behavior and its consequences. "Miss Martinez," he said quietly, his voice lacking any trace of his former arrogance, "I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to apologize. Not just for what I did to you, but for everything. I was a bully who thought my dad's position made me untouchable. I was wrong." Jessica studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, she saw genuine remorse and what appeared to be the beginning of real maturity. "Derek, apologies are a start, but they have to be backed up by changed behavior. Are you prepared to do that?" Derek nodded emphatically. "I've been doing community service at a local youth center, working with kids who've been bullied. I want to make things right." Jessica extended her hand, and Derek shook it gratefully. "Then you're welcome in my classroom, just like any other student who's willing to learn and treat others with respect." As the group began to disperse, Mrs. Fleming approached Principal Ashford and Dr. Morrison. The administrators who had once seemed so intimidating now looked at Jessica with newfound respect and perhaps a touch of awe. "Jessica," Dr. Morrison said, "I want you to know that Riverside Academy is proud to have you on our faculty. Your courage, both in the classroom and in this courtroom, represents everything we hope to instill in our students." Mrs. Fleming nodded in agreement. "We've also decided to implement a new anti-bullying program district-wide, with you as the lead coordinator if you're interested." Jessica smiled, feeling truly settled for the first time in 7 years. "I'd be honored." As she walked toward her car, Jessica Martinez, Alina Vasquez, thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A bully's cruel prank had shattered the careful walls she had built around her past, but in doing so, it had freed her to become the person she was always meant to be. She was no longer running from her past or hiding her strength. She was a teacher, a martial artist, a survivor, and a guardian of the next generation, and she was finally completely home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.